Hey there, this is another post-market practical trade video that we are going to have a look at. This video is regarding the PCR. So if you have watched the PCR video wherein I explained how PCR works, I said that PCR has some values to it. Low PCR is bullish, high PCR is bearish, and anything in between is basically neutral. So how PCR actually works and how we can take advantage of it. So here right now what happened, Bank Nifty opened gap up and then sustained that gap up and then eventually broke out like anything. It was like 3.5% plus at this point over here. And then all of a sudden from nowhere it started correcting. It started correcting heavily, then went into sideways consolidation mode, and then the sideways consolidation. After the breakdown of that consolidation, the negative movement continued. So why this happened? Why did Bank Nifty lose all of this momentum that was gathered from morning in an instant? So for this, we have to look at PCR values. So this image right over here shows PCR values on every 5 minutes. So on the very left hand side, you have the time, which is as you can see over here, it's 10:30, then 10:35, then 10:40, 10:50, 10:55, 10, 11, 11:05. So every 5 minutes, the PCR value gets updated. This is a paid website, so this is not available for free. But yeah, such services are available. So I was looking at this high PCR, rising PCR volume, which was there. So as you can see, from 10 o'clock, the PCR was around 1.43, which was like, okay, slightly bearish. But then as the time passed on, the PCR value kept on increasing. So here was the actual game that I was looking into, that why is PCR rising while the markets are also rising? Like if the markets are rising, the PCR needs to cool down, because if the PCR is low, that means the markets are bullish. But if the markets are bullish and the PCR is high, that means something is cooking. That means PCR is going to trip something off for us. So I was having a look at these values of PCR, and all of a sudden, after 11:45, PCR started rising from, I'm not sure if you can see the values clearly over here, but right now where my mouse is there, the PCR value is 1.52. After that, it went 1.55, then 1.57, and eventually at 12 o'clock, between 12 o'clock and 12:15, it was trading at 1.72. So the PCR of 1.72 is extremely high, as we have discussed in our PCR video, that PCR if goes from like 1.72 to 1.7 to 1.9, PCR, the value of PCR is extremely high, and then we can expect a kind of correction in markets. So this, the time over here is somewhere between 12 p.m. to 12:15 p.m. The PCR is extremely high. And let's now move to our charts and see what happened over there. So here, this is a 1 minute chart. I'm keeping it for simplicity purpose because today the Bank Nifty was so volatile that if I switch to 3 minutes or 5 minutes chart, it will be a mess. So as you can see, the markets were rising, rising, rising. Here comes the 12 o'clock mark. So 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, the PCR started to rise like crazy. It went from 1.5 to 1.6, and then immediately from 1.6 it went to 1.7. And the effect was clearly seen on the markets. This complete bearish engulfing with such high volumes clearly gave an indication that PCR is coming into play over here. So how can we take advantage of it? If you have this service wherein you have the access to PCR, you can keep a watch on PCR every now and then. And when the PCR is high or low, take advantage of that accordingly. So like in this case, in this particular case, the markets were rising and the PCR was rising as well. So I had some doubt in my mind that why is PCR rising if the markets are going up? So the PCR went 1.7, which meant that extreme bearishness might soon kick in, and that was confirmed by this candle. I also looked at 3 minutes candle because 1 minute candle never gives you confirmation. So to get confirmation, you always have to switch into 3 minutes or 5 minutes chart, and similar kind of pattern was seen on 3 minutes chart as well. So after this 3 minute bearish engulfing was there, I was pretty convinced that the markets are not going up above. And this particular view negates about the high that the markets recently made. So even if like the market goes above this and the PCR still continues to rise, which is a very, very, very rare case scenario, you have to exit if you are short around these levels. But it did not happen. This bearish engulfing completely wiped off everyone and then the selling started. It lasted off a bit. Now you might say that, hey, this is not a really big move, but because the bank Nifty has rallied so much today, this number is not really actually looking out big than it actually is. Like this kind, the move that is there, it is like 800 to 400. So this is 400 point move in bank Nifty, and 400 point move in bank Nifty is a no joke. So even though it might look like, hey, this hasn't fallen much, this is like okayish down move. No, this is a 400 point down move, which is like huge, which is huge. After that, what happened? Market went into consolidation, and once it broke below the consolidation zone, it was like, okay, I'm going to free fall. Then again, it now again here you might say that, hey, Shrish, this is not a big move, but again, as I said, because Bank Nifty has rallied 3.5% today, everything is looking kind of small. So this move right over here, this small move, which you might say, was also 250 points down move. So which is not a kind of down move you would say is small. This is a big down move. Just because the market has rallied so much today, the candles are looking small. But this was a 400 pointer, this was a 250 pointer. After that, it consolidated again. Like the market, the behavior of the markets remains the same. It falls, consolidate, and falls. And when it rises, consolidates, and rises. So the consolidation was there. And once it broke below that consolidation, again we saw a down move, and that down move was again like 350 to 100. So it was again a 250 pointer move. So this is how you can take advantage of PCR. Once you get a grip of how to use PCR, how to understand these values, you can actually access, pay some if you want to, and have access to those PCR datas if you want to. But yeah, PCR works, and works like charm when it does, because it was pretty evident the market was riding up high and the PCR was also rising, which was a sign of concern that why is PCR rising if the markets are going up? Yeah, it does rise, but not the kind of a rise it showed today. So I was a bit concerned about the rising up move, the momentum that was there today in the markets. Nifty did not rally at all. Nifty was a slow as whatever you can say. It did not rally. It showed some profit bookings, later on covered, and then consolidation, and then just broke down, and then again consolidation. So Nifty was pretty much flat today, but Bank Nifty had momentum because ICICI the results had come, I guess yesterday, and ICICI it was probably the best results in last 5 years or so, and because ICICI has a good weightage on Bank Nifty, so it rallied. Bank Nifty rallied 3.5%, eventually ended up giving 1.5% of gains. But ICICI is doing well. It's like around 12% up today. But I guess you have understood how to use PCR. I'll again take you to that image. So rising PCR, yeah, here you can see the rising PCR value got me concerned, and at one point where it hit 1.72 and the market gave a bearish engulfing on both 1 minutes and 3 minutes, it was pretty much the sign of uh, bearishness that was there. So I hope you understood this video, and if you did, then make sure to like the video, and if you haven't, then make sure to ask me the questions, ask me the doubts, because I'm there for you. I'll answer all your doubts that are there. Okay, I will see you in the next one. Until then, bye bye, take care. Ciao.